Okay class, good afternoon. So our lecture today is firearm identification. Wait a minute. Ito. Sa firearm identification. So it says that it is the identification of fired bullets. So mga fire na bullets, ibig sabihin na nagawas na siya sa barrel. Mga bullets, cartridge, cases, or other ammunition components as having been fired from a specific firearm. So, ibig sabihin na gina-identify nato unsa to mga bullet na or cartridges na mugawas sa isa ka firearm for forensic. So, legal matters or applied law. To identify either sa kinsa ang nagpusil or unsa na firearm ang gigamit sa pagpusil. So, principles. So, firearm identification is a discipline mainly concerned with determining whether a bullet was fired by a particular weapon. So, yung sabihin na kung unsa jud na pusil ang gigamit sa paggawas ato na bala. Class characteristics and individual characteristics plays very important role in identification of firearms. So later on we will discuss about these characteristics. When two metal species comes in contact with each other, so ang duha daw ka object which is hard, metal objects man, harder than metal will apply scrappy. The softer the metal, this leaves the evidence of the contact of both pieces. So nado ebidensya pag ang two metal species comes in contact with each other. So nado mga kita ng mga marks. Firearms identification is actually a form of a tool mark. So remember and take note, tool mark identification where the firearm, because it is made of material harder than ammunition components, acts as a tool to leave impressed or striated marks. So take note, impressed or striated marks on the various ammunition components that come into contact with the firearm. So tool marks produced on the cartridge cases will be in two basic forms. So striated action marks and impressed action marks. So take note and remember that class. So principle of identification ni Edmund Locard, every contact leaves a trace. So every contact leaves a trace. Muna yang gisulti si Edmund Locard. So bullet identification class. So what is bullet identification? It is when a bullet is fired under high pressure through a handgun. Having refilled barrel expands and refills the whole cross section of the barrel. So markings of lines and grooves will be quite visible in those cases where the bullet fills the whole cross-section of the barrel when fired. So pag mauman daw ni mag-fire ang isa ka bullet, so magbilin siya og cross-section sa barrel. So nariya po ang bullet, magbilin po siya og line and grooves sa iyang part. So these are the examples of bullets. Muna siyang example sa bullets. So kanina po so sikas. So muna siya mga fired bullets na. Adili pa muna siya mga example sa mga bullets po. So okay. So principle, in a fired bullet, the caliber, number, width, depth, direction, and twist of line and grooves forms class characteristics. So unsa yung gina-form? Class characteristics. Unsa man yung mga caliber, number, width, depth, direction, and twist of line and grooves. So the final illustration in the line and grooves are individual characteristics. So unsa man siya na characteristics? Final illustration. So kanina mga illustration, laylay ni siya sa every firearm. So sa every firearm laylay siya. So muna magtawag siya og individual characteristics. So sa ingon ni Locard na there are Blue card says, di ba, every contact gives a trace. So, every contact. So, ang firearm pod or ang bullet pod, napod siya specific characteristics. Ang tinatawag na na specific individual characteristics sa iyang firearm. So, the final station. So, class characteristics. Once a manufacturer chooses a rifling process for a particular class of weapon, they keep it consistent. Land and grooves are the same for a model. So, pareho daw ang land and grooves. 32 caliber Smith & Wesson had 5 lands and grooves, 5 grooves dapat, twisting to the right. So, twisting to the right ang 32 caliber Smith & Wesson. So, 32 caliber Colt naman has 6 lands and grooves. So, unum daw. Twisting to the left. So, twisting to the left din siya. Class characteristics can eliminate certain makes but are not enough to ID a particular gun. So, dili japon siya enough na mo ID sa particular gun. So, individual characteristics, nata dere. So, imperfections in the manufacturing of process make each barrel unique. So, make each barrel unique daw. Rifled barrels, even if made in succession, will not have identical station. Dili yun siya pareha og station na pareha man sila barrel, pero pag magawas na kayo ng bala, dili yun na sila pareha og markings na makuha niya. Pareha ning illustration given below. This is our scratches of the land and grooves made by the firing of this bullet. So, basic bullet identification, rifling. So, hierarchical grooves in the bore of a firearm barrel to impart rotary motion to a projectile. Muna siya tinatawag na rifling. So, muna siya, kanigas, class muna siya ang tinatawag na LAN. So, LAN ni siya, kaning murag burot-burot sa imong barrel. So, ang ubos ana, yang groove. So, groove impression. So, dari, pag magi kay dari ang sa kabaril, mag-cause siya og groove impression. Pag dari na pod, mag-agi na pod ang bullet dari, mag-cause siya og LAN impression. Means, LIA, LAN engrave area. So, GIA, groove engrave area. So, cartridge identification. So, cartridge identification is which are fired from automatic and repeating firearms. So, muna siya. Repeating firearms show repetitive marks. So, balik daw na markings which are useful in identification of the type of weapon used. So man, ngano siya importante kay useful dahil siya in identification of the type of weapon used. So, anatomy of cartridges. Muna siya. Ang anatomy class. So, as you nakita ang bullet, muna siya dari ang primer. Structure, na dari ang part, cartridge case, muna siya ang cartridge case, kani hole, crimp, kani, dito dari, murag crimp, ana, dapita, kani lure, kani mga lines, propellant, ang sulod sa isa ka cartridge, flash hole, kani dari. So, bullet, muna siya, pag mo maigo na yung primer, mag-cause siya action dari sa chemical reaction dari sa heated action, then para mag-fire, mag-push ang bullet. So, hollow point. So, kani siya na bullet is hollow point. So, may hollow point siya na dari. Anatomy of shot shell. So, muna siya ang sa mga shotgun, kana body case. Shot. These are balls. Crimp. So, napo dari sa ibabaw. Crimp. Lock siya. So, later on, we will discuss all about this. Minsan yung structure group, minsan yung primer. Later on, our topic, shot protector wad. Muna siyang shot protector wad. Propellant. So, napadali propellant. Base wad. Napadali base wad. Flash hole. So, ano battery cap. Battery cap o primer. Pare-pareho na sila. Ito. Primer. So, dili pala. Ang battery cap, dito pala. Umasa ang primer sa shotgun gibutang murag may magtawid. So, rim, base. So, these are the anatomy class of a cartridge, either sa bullet or from a shotgun, shot shell. So, cartridge case, muna siya ang markings na nabilin. So, kita ninyo na yung markings na yung murag dark groove na siya. So, a fired cartridge case contains firing pin nose marks. So, muna daw ni siya ang mga marks, breech face marks on the head of the cartridge case. Dere sad fire pin nose mark asa ni makita on over the percussion cap. So chamber marks on the wall of the chamber cartridge case, extraction marks on the rim surface and extractor groove. Asa na siya makuha. Ejector marks on the periphery of the head of the cartridge case. So firearm generated markings on the cartridge case, semi-automatic pistol cartridge. So these are example of marks kung asa sila dapat makita. Kita niya na ejector marks. So diya daw makita ang marks sa ejector. For example, breech mark face, asa dapat ang mga markings, extractor marks, dara. Ejector marks, dari. Ejection port mark, slide drag mark, so nara. Slide scuff mark, nara po. Firing pin, asa dapat ang firing pin, so doon na po siya sa primer. Create siya og mark. Firing pin scrap mark. Firing pin impression. So tunga yun ang firing pin. Extractor marks, breech face marks, and once again. So those are the marks malocate kung unsa pod ang pangalan sa area sa isa ka cartridge, kung sa iyang pangalan, unsa pod siya na mark asa siya dapat na malocate. So take note and try to remember it fast. So straighted action marks, so straight scratches are produced when the cartridge case moves laterally against the tool. So the inner surface of the firearm producing a scrappy or straighted marks. So produce siya o scrappy or straighted marks. Straighted action marks are common to cartridge cases that have passed through the action of an auto-loading or repeating firearm. So common siya sa auto-loading or repeating firearm. So try to remember it guys. Straighted action marks included chamber marks, shear marks, firing pin, drag marks, and extractor marks, and ejector marks. So kita niyo na siya mga example sa mga firing pin impression, doon sa firing pin, breech plug, doon dari. Okay, ejector mark, dari. Extractor marks dito, dari. Chamber marks, dari. Bold G and marks from expansion into the feed. Nara ka ni. Nag-create siya og expansion. Diba? Tungod sa iyang heated action dari tungod sa iyang propellant. Feed ramp. So chamber marks, one of the most common straighted action marks are called chamber marks. So kita juga ni siya, chamber marks common man. Roughness in the chamber of a firearm can scratch the outer walls of the cartridge case when loaded and removed. So ano mga-cause unsay mga bisan wala siya ni mabuto, mag-cause japon siya og scratch chamber marks, okay? Tungod sa iyang when loaded and removed. So gina-load ug remove siya from the chamber. Most chamber marks occur after the cartridge is fired. So pag magawas na ni siya na pag mapabuto na isa ka firearm, so magawas ang cartridge sa chamber, this is called chamber marks. Cartridge case expand when fired. So ang cartridge case daw dili siya mo expand siya, so may ang iyang form change, pressing out against the walls of the chamber. When they are pulled out of the chamber, the sides of the cartridge case can be scratched. The comparison image below shows chamber marks on 22 caliber rimfire cartridge cases. So muna siya, chamber marks, example. So mga chamber marks. Okay, another illustration showing chamber marks. Kung sa may na marks dari, branded strea dari, panginani pod, branded spiral, kani floating, rust, diagonal, ramping, bulging. So nag-expand sa ramping, bulging, ramp, bulging. Sa bulging gani, expand siya. So shear marks, asam ni firing pin hole, doon sa firing pin hole nag-cause siya of shear marks. Another common straighted action mark are called shear mark. Common Japan, produced by a Glock pistols on a cartridge case primer. So Glock pistols mag-cause of shear marks have a rectangular firing pin hole below in their breech face. Excuse me guys. Below in the breech face. So firing pin drag marks. So in a similar process, a straighted marks called firing pin drag marks can be produced when the firing pin springs forward to strike the primer of a cartridge. It may remain slightly forward and embedded in the primer. Certain barrels, like in the Glock, drop down slightly as a recoil is forcing the action open. The cartridge case wraps with the barrel, causing the nose of the producing firing pin to drag across the primer as it leaves the firing pin impression. So this below comparison image shows the firing pin drag marks. So firing pin drag marks by a Colt Auto pistol, 445 automatic. So kita ninyo na. Okay. Structure marks and other action marks usually found in a stated form are those created by the instructor of the most auto-loading or repeating firearms. The instructor is a small part of sometimes resembles a hook that is used to remove a cartridge or cartridge case from the chamber of a firearm. So instructor mo ni siya ang iyang klase sa dili siya mag-cause of markings, instructor. Okay. So, ejector marks, as described above, the instructor pulls the cartridge case out of the firearm chamber. As the cartridge case is pulled to the rear, it will be struck somewhere on an opposing edge by a part as seen below called the ejector. So, muna siya. Opposing edge. So, kanina pula. So, pwede siya mo eject. Tungod sa iyang pagawas mo siya tungod ani pang. So, wait siya og ejector marks. So, cartridge case ejection. So, these are the ejecting sequence. So, as you can see, asa mo gawas ang cartridge dere. Nag-recoil siya, nag-slide moves back. Okay, diyan nagawas ang isa cartridge. So, impress action marks. So, ejector marks can be striated in nature, but a lot of the time they are impress action marks. Impress na dyan siya, impress action marks. Impress marks are created on cartridge case when it impacts the tool, again, the firearm. So, impacts the firearm with the adequate velocity or pressure to leave an impress or indented mark. Impress action marks, with a few exceptions, are produced when a cartridge case is fired in a firearm. So, impress action marks are firing pin impression, breechface marks. So, when you say firing pin impression, are indentation created when the firing pin of a firearm strikes the primer of a center fire cartridge case or the rim of a fire cartridge case. If the nose of the firing pin has manufacturing imperfection, so may manufacturing imperfection or damage, this potentially unique characteristics can be impressed into the metal of the primer or rim of the cartridge case. So, mag-cause siya of impression, unique, para ma-characterize ang katong tawag nilang firing pin impression. Okay? So, firing pin impression, muna siya. As you can see, muna siya ang sample. Dari kanina hole na diya ang sulutong pin para mag-cause siya og damage sa full cartridge para mo-fire ang firearm. So, firing pin shape, cartridge case identification, firing pin shapes, muna siya. Ang shape sa firing pin, rectangular. Just take note of that, class. Okay. Breech marks, by far the most common impress action marks on cartridge case are breech marks. Most fired cartridge cases are identified as having been fired by a specific firearm through the identification of breech marks. So, unsa daw ang ginabuhat sa most are identified by unsa man identifying the breech mark. So, dali ra daw ma-identify ang unsa na siya na mga bullet na gi-fire sa specific firearm through identification of its breech mark. So, very high pressure are generated within a firearm. When a cartridge is discharged, this pressure forces the bullet from the cartridge case and down the barrel. At the very high velocities, when a firearm is discharged, the shooter will feel the firearm jump, rearward. This rearward movement of the firearm is called recoil, so pushing backward. Okay. So, breech face marks, ano siya mga example? Heavy left side, vertical, so sandblasted, mouse ear rim dents, molted. Ano siya mga example sa breach marks. So, bullet and cartridge comparison. To match the bullet and cartridge to a gun, test bullet must be fired through a suspect firearm for comparison. So, to match the bullet and cartridge to a gun, test bullets must be fired through a suspected firearm for comparison. So, para may comparison. Test bullets. Test bullets are the bullets which are fired from the suspected firearm for the purpose of comparison with the crime bullet. So, i-compare ang crime bullet. So, ang kaning mga test bullets, mo din siya ang mga bullets na ina-fire sa isa ka suspected firearm for identification or comparison of the crime bullet. So, test bullets are variety of materials like rags, soap, paraffin, ice, water, and cotton have been used. Okay? Remember that, guys. Use to obtain. However, the most suitable material is water. The suitable firearm is fired in a container filled with water. Lid on tank is closed and locked, and muzzle of firearm is placed on an open tube at the end of the tank and fired. Friction of water slows down at the bullet. They end up on the bottom of the tank about the halfway down its length. So that is so we will discuss more on our discussion next week about some methods and techniques for bullet cartridge and case comparison. Thank you and God bless.